Hello and welcome to the 42 Rugby Weekly. This podcast is sponsored by William Hill. Remember to gamble responsibly and visit dunlewy.net for more information. My name is Gavan Casey and I'm joined as always by my colleague with the 42.e, Murray Kinsella. Murray, how are things on your end?
Yeah, all great. It's been another hectic one. Loads of England media this week, which has actually been a nice change. A very pleasurable experience, I have to say. But yeah, it's nice just to be a couple of days out now from a massive Six Nations game. Can't wait.
What could you be possibly getting out there, Murray? A pleasurable experience with your English counterparts rather than the usual dross from our Irish players?
No. To be fair, loads of the Irish players are great value as well. But yeah, it was a different change of scene. Ellis Genge was up, and we didn't even use the stuff on the 42, but he's an interesting character. Matt Proudfoot, happy to speak about anything, and Eddie Jones just today. He wasn't his usual incendiary self, but he was interesting anyway, as always. He's always got a few comments and a few lines, so yeah, it was good just to mix it up a little bit. It's been non-stop Zoom calls with Ireland camp for the last few months, so change of scene is good.
Bernard Jackman, delighted to see you as well. How's your week going?
Yeah, good. I'm looking forward to Saturday. I know we said Scotland was going to be the litmus test for Ireland. We'd know if we had a team or not. Unfortunately, I still am sure. So no, obviously we have a team. I'm still not sure how good we are. And I think, yeah, this week will hopefully give us a clear idea of how much progress or lack of we've made.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to the chat today. We're going to delve into that Scotland game, look ahead to England naturally enough. Field a couple of your questions from the members rugby WhatsApp group, members.the42.e. If you want to sign up there, get all of the extra content and support our independent sports journalism. To begin with though, Murray, probably the headline news of the week really caught a lot of us by surprise. CJ Stander announcing his retirement, and understandably a lot of adulation coming his way for his 9 years of service in both Munster Red and Irish Green. And it's one of those weird ones when you're doing a podcast and you basically just have to wax lyrical about a guy now for a few minutes because he's been so good and we're going to miss him, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. It leaves a little bit of a hole there, but loads of candidates, as he mentioned himself, to probably step in, and there is always a back row conveyor belt there. It certainly was surprise news, certainly this week. You know, as I say, it was hectic enough anyway without it. I think you might have mentioned this a few months ago. Did you, Gav? I had this vague memory of you asking us a question whether he was going to retire. Is that me just...
I had mentioned it, but somebody had said it to me, and I think it turned out that they had read it from a Jerry Thornley piece in the Irish Times some weeks prior. So I actually think Thornley had this story like mid-season.
I don't recall that now. Fair play if he did, but it caught us all off guard, really. And yeah, what a statement to go out on. Obviously talking about his family, and a lengthy statement that really went into the decision in some depth. And I suppose it makes sense when you read through it and think about him having been here on his own for quite a bit, really, of the pandemic. His wife and kid have been back in South Africa, so that's really tough. Personal circumstances. Certainly on the pitch, he hasn't let up, really, has he? Still been in excellent form, still been one of the first names on the Ireland team sheet, as he has been right since 2016 when he made his debut against Wales and was named man of the match. He really hasn't let up. He's been consistently good for Ireland. He probably hasn't convinced everyone still, and certain aspects of his game people complain about and say he could bring more, but what he has brought has been undoubtedly important. Consistent work rate, excellent around the breakdown, always putting his hand up for carries and tackles, good in his detail around the set piece, and capable of some explosive moments that people probably overlook at times as well as just fitting in and fitting into team cultures and buying into that side of things. He's absolute, I suppose he's really a hero down in Munster, isn't he? I knew he was very popular, but kind of blown away by the outpouring of kind of love and affection for him this week. It must be really heartening for him and his family. So yeah, he's made an absolute success of a move that happened all the way back in 2012. It was really interesting looking back on that try against Glasgow on his home debut where he runs the length of the pitch. He probably changed as a player, and certainly the body composition, I think, changed a little bit to suit the demands of Test rugby. But he has been excellent ever since he arrived, and certainly the most successful project player that Ireland ever had. I know people will complain about that, and it's obviously changed to 5 years now. But he has bought in, and you can never question his commitment in what he delivered on the pitch, as well as being unbelievably popular with fans off it. So he heads back to South Africa after this with just an incredible record behind him.
He's in the pantheon of great Irish back rows, I think, Bernard. I know, as Murray says, he hasn't won over everybody, but few players really do in this day and age. Like, I don't think anybody is universally popular among rugby fans of any team, for that matter. I think actually Stander is about as close as you can get at the moment. And when you consider what he's put into the Irish jersey, I know it's only been kind of 5 years, but some of the performances, and as Murray says, the absolute commitment to the shirt for a guy who isn't Irish. Like, let's not sugarcoat it, but for what he gave to that jersey and for what he gave to Munster.
Yeah, no, he has been. He's been an incredible servant to both teams. Normally plays 80 minutes. Has evolved his game. I mean, he was signed as that dynamic ball carrying eight who could run the wider channels, and his game became more closed. And probably put higher. He increased his work rate. He just, his activity is incredibly high. He was very powerful and dynamic close to the line. He was very hard to stop. He was very good in those pick and jams, and he's very good as a jackal threat as well. Which he probably didn't have early in his game. And he's going to be missed. I think it opens up the door for Doris or Coombs or whatever. So I think probably long term for Ireland, I think we'll be fine. But that shouldn't reduce the admiration and respect we should have for what he's given to Munster and Ireland.
People can probably take for granted as well the fact that he has bought into Munster's culture and kind of embedded himself in Limerick society, if you like, and really bought into a sense of Irishness as well while he has been de facto Irish. Like, I know the anthem thing might seem gimmicky to some people, but it was him sincerely making an effort to try and be like everybody else. But as Murray says, like, he came over very young. He couldn't even speak English, which is a fairly famous part of his backstory at this point when he arrived. And it can be difficult as well for guys to settle in. I always get the impression from Stander that he is like 100% committed to Munster's sake, but that rugby is kind of a job for him as well, and that I don't know if he necessarily socialises with his teammates that much off the pitch. It's like he gives 100% in the professional environment and then kind of keeps to himself a little bit off the field. And after 9 years of living in the country, particularly when, as Murray says, when your family is now back home, these things can kind of take their toll as well, like where you would probably have a pining for home after a lengthy period of time.
Yeah, without a doubt. And I think he has bought in. Particularly, he's very good with fans. He's very good with the press. He's probably more open than some of our own players are, and probably he's gone the extra mile with the public, really, compared. And that's probably why he's hugely respected and well liked, not just for what we see, between the white lines. It's what he's done off the field. And look, when you take a project player like that, there's the risk: are they going to fit in culturally? Are they going to perform on the pitch? And there's absolutely no doubt. I mean, he's pretty much he has been first choice since he became available. And as I said, playing 80 minutes every week and being a big part of obviously our best year, 2018. So, I'm sure when he hangs up the boots, he'll look back at his period, with a lot of pride.
The thing that I suppose makes such a shock of is he's so young. Like, he turns 31 early next month, and from what I know, I mean, there's no major injury issues there. Obviously, he's battered his body, and that should be stated again. Like, I'd say there's no higher collision toll in anyone in Irish rugby than him. And very direct at times, but it is surprising in that sense. It'll be interesting to see if this is a trend, particularly, I suppose, with players who are based away from their home nation. We've probably seen little hints of that, even could see it wanting to go back and other kind of less high profile similar examples. So that's a fascinating side of it. And it'll be fascinating to see if anyone can convince him to play when he's back over there. Because I'd be shocked if no one in South African rugby, like Jake White, obviously the one who stands out, is thinking, okay, this guy's coming back to South Africa. He's a top level international first choice test back row who may even be on a Lions tour in a couple of months' time, or Lions series rather, and won't try and convince him. So that'll be an interesting side of it as well. But from what I can see, the Irish fans who adore him won't have an issue with that, really. And I can understand people have now voiced concerns and I suppose around a guy coming over as a project player and heading away straight away after they retire back to their home nation, and I suppose bemoaning that reality of project players all over again. As I say, I think it is a good thing that it's changed to 5 years and that there'll probably be less of that transactional side of it. But you couldn't really say that about CJ Stander and his family. I mean, in terms of the buy-in, as we say here, and investing themselves emotionally. And there's all sorts of different nationality these days, and people are so... I mean, there's such a movement around the world pre-COVID, obviously, and you can kind of have a home away from home, and certainly it's felt like that with him. So I'll be fascinated just to see if this is the final chapter or if there's another one that kind of adds on after they release the first edition, and in a year's time they have to update the book.
Yeah, I did see a lot of people doubting the sincerity of his statement yesterday, Bernard, and a lot of Munster fans feeling aggrieved that, say, suggestions that Stander had tried to negotiate a new deal with the IRFU. We can't find kind of substance to that. We don't know. But at the same time, as Murray says, he could be 100% committed to retiring now and moving home and not thinking about playing rugby again. But the external perception of it on behalf of some of the clubs back home and clubs in Japan, maybe France, is that he's a 30-year-old free agent, really, more so than a retired rugby player. After a few months, 6 months at home, not playing ball, letting the body recover, you can get the bug again, I'm pretty sure.
Yeah, absolutely. I personally think he may play again. I'm not doubting the sincerity of the statement. I just think that get home, be around family, and he obviously had started his career in South Africa. And I know someone like Gio Apollon, who I coached in Grenoble. He went from Western Province to France to Japan. But he wanted to finish where it started, and he's back playing now with the Bulls with Jake White, and I can imagine the Bulls have an unbelievable back row, and there were certainly rumours back in November, December that Jake was looking at CJ, and obviously they got Marcel, but I mean I think that any of those top franchises, if they have a back row shortage, I mean you're going to pick up an incredible player. Plus, if he did get an urge to play again, obviously we all know the Japanese season is a lot shorter as well. So, the South Africans who go there do tend to have a very good balance in terms of their season in Japan and obviously getting home. So, and because, as Murray said, his injury profile is really strong, he will be attractive to players. So look, I'm just thinking that, you're 31 years of age and you've had a rest, you've got home, travel opens up a bit again. I think it'd be very hard to not want to have another experience, because if you look at how much he bought into his experience in Ireland, I mean, he seems to be an inquisitive, people person. So you could see him wanting to continue. I could see him wanting to continue that, but that's not saying that he's not done. It's just, I just think that, given it's a very unusual situation with COVID, and I wouldn't be surprised if he played again, because he's still got a lot of rugby left in him if he wants,
If he doesn't play again, I have massive respect for that as well. Someone to just walk away from it and put their family first, as he says, that'd be cool to see, because it is just a career. If he can do something else and not batter his body and not be away every single weekend from his family as they kind of grow and grow older, that'd be amazing, I think. So yeah, it'll be interesting to see if that is more of a trend in the game, and to see what happens. Listen, I will be surprised if he doesn't hit 30 carries this weekend, 30 tackles, throw in a few rucks, and is just unbelievably rampant on his last Ireland game. He's not going to go on that summer tour. He'll be hoping for a Lions tour as a finale. But it's a pity for him that he's not going to have fans in the stadium for the send-off. But I would be surprised if he doesn't make a big stamp on the game.
Who knows? He might get a send-off in Thomond Park someday if he lands back up with the Bulls or somebody like that. I quite like the idea of that, actually. Murray, on the women's side of things, a big announcement yesterday, I think was it yesterday? Yeah, about a three-tier competition from 2023. Can you run us through that? Some people might not be aware of it, actually. It kind of seemed to creep under the radar a small bit. And talk to us about the kind of pros and cons of it from your point of view as you see it.
Yeah, so this was kind of delayed. This announcement was delayed by COVID-19, but great to see it finally done. They've announced a new competition called WXV, so obviously Women's 15. And it's an annual global competition. It's going to be every year in a kind of September, October window, and across 3 tiers. So 16 teams across 3 tiers every autumn, essentially. And it will follow on from the regional competition. So the top 3 teams in the Women's Six Nations will go into that top tier, and so on with regional qualifiers from around the world. For me, this is a great move. I mean, we've talked about a kind of global men's calendar for so long, and the women's game kind of has nailed it down here already. It's obviously going to increase commercial interest. It'll increase the competitiveness, as well as having really meaningful tests across the year, which has been an issue for the women's game for a long time. I mean, I can't wait for the first one. It's going to start in 2023, and it's going to be fascinating, even just to see who qualifies in. There's going to be some battle for third place, even in the Six Nations. Behind you would presume France and England. So yeah, it's fascinating and positive in that sense, and it certainly gives a stronger calendar and sense of momentum in the women's game. And you would hope that other nations will soon be in a position to follow the likes of England in professionalism. This is a step towards that. Hopefully it'll increase the revenues. World Rugby they say they're very confident that there's going to be a lot of strong interest from broadcasters, particularly with the joined up nature of it all. But it is, I suppose, on the negative side, it probably increases the gap in some ways. I mean, if you're not in that top tier competition, it's going to be hard to get those the test level you require to actually improve. And say someone like Spain, who are a good women's nation, they're not actually in the Six Nations, so they can't qualify into the top tier as things stand. So that's tricky. There's no relegation from the top tier for the first couple of years as well. So there's definitely frustrations in that regard. And there's a whole lot of challenges in terms of making sure that logistically these things are nailed on, that there's a really good host for each of the tournaments every single year, and that there is still signs of progressing the women's game in countries outside the really big 3 or 4 and increasing that competitiveness. We've spoken about that in the men's game a lot, and that's a crucial challenge for the women's game. But on the whole, this is positive news. It's exciting to get it out there finally. And it just adds another, I suppose, carrot in the women's game every year for players to chase. You want to be in that top tier. You want to be playing against nations that you don't get a chance to regularly. And you want to be playing as many test matches as possible. So it ticks all those boxes. And I'm excited to see it come into life in a couple of years.
Yeah, it certainly sounds good to me. I love the idea of dead rubbers in the Six Nations being kind of eradicated. There's always something, a bigger picture to play for. And as you say, like the men's game, it's something that the men's game could conceivably learn from when it does kick off. Let's see how it plays out in 2023. Looking forward to it already. Looking backwards, Bernard, Scotland, Ireland, and you mentioned there are probably more questions than answers. We had cheated up as a kind of a litmus test for Andy Farrell's team. They passed a lot of tests, probably failed others within the space of that game. What was your kind of overriding reaction coming out of it, or even now, Thursday, as we've had time to mull over it?
Yeah, I thought it was a game of very low quality. Both teams made a huge amount of errors. Scotland, I mean, if you're Gregor Townsend, they're going to break his heart. They're just so frustrating, and they kill themselves. You know, obviously their line out imploded, and some of it was great defensive work from Ireland, but you know, there was big issues with their calling system and their speed on the ground, and that obviously, you know, hamstrung them in terms of having no decent launch plays from that area of the game. We saw what they could do off scrum ball, and they had us on the back foot massively. So, okay, it's easier to tackle off scrum, but I still think they have the back line to hurt us if they had a decent source of possession off line out. So we're quite lucky there. And also they dealt with the high ball that we put on them really poorly. I mean, Ireland kicked. I thought our contestants were shocking. A lot of the ones off Sexton were okay, but a lot of our kicking off 9 was just really poor, really short, shallow, without meaning to be, I don't think, but just got Scotland. We got the ball back, so it wasn't a big issue. And from an Irish point of view, yeah, defensively, you know, we had dominated possession, but we still conceded 3 tries. So I am worried about our D, and you know, I know everyone's focused on our attack, but and that's definitely a work in progress. But our defense, for me, is despite a huge amount of effort, is weak, and I fear for England this weekend that they could rip us apart. But obviously, you know, Slade being out to help in that regard. But yeah, I'm not convinced, to be honest. Not convinced.
Well, I certainly have the fear of God in me this week, Murray, after that game, I have to say. And as Bernard says, there are a lot of areas which don't seem to be showing any signs of improvement. You were chatting to Owen Toolan on Monday in relation to the attack, saying that you feel as though it might have regressed actually at this point compared to some of the things we saw earlier in Andy Farrell's tenure. Let's focus on some of the positives though as well, as we do naturally. But we're talking about a victory, and a victory that we were kind of doubtful whether Ireland could get. So Bernard pinpoints probably the reason why Ireland win that game. It is the line out and the fact that they were able to dismantle Scottish ball. Scotland just could not get a foundation in the game. And I actually think there's evidence to suggest that if they had a functioning line out, they would have crucified us. That's how important it was that Ireland got after Scottish ball.
100%. I mean, Eddie Jones didn't say a whole lot earlier on, but he basically said Ireland's game is line out and a bit of kicking in on top of it. And I think that's really fair. I don't think you could argue with that. The attack is not firing at the moment. I do, and I've looked back again at those games, even against Scotland last year. I thought there were way more glimpses in the autumn. Even you'd think of that passage leading up to the Duncan Taylor yellow card, a really nice passage of attack. There were similar examples across 2020, but I haven't really seen that this year. And I feel they're in a muddled place where the confidence has probably been shot. And now they're coming up against one of the best defences around, one that has absolutely smothered them and crucified them the last couple of occasions. I think Eddie Jones has called it. I think they're going to be extremely kick heavy, and I think they're going to be focused absolutely on the set piece and not worry about attack really this weekend. I think that makes sense this week. It's maybe a little bit depressing, but that's where they are right now. There's no point in them trying to play with a poor attack into the face of that English defence. That's just lunacy if you're trying to do that. The same that you've tried before, the definition of insanity. So I think Conor Murray, if he's back at 9, as we speak, the team's not been named, but it looks like he might be back in at 9. I agree with Bernard. The box kicking from 9 was poor, and I was shocked they weren't punished more. Actually, to be honest, it was freakish the way some of the balls bounced. Our Irish players chasing, working really hard, and that is a positive again. Like, you know, ask Johnny Major in the week, what do Ireland do well, and he basically said, you know, They work hard, they fight for each other, they're always turning up for each other, and you cannot dispute that. Now, that should be a prerequisite in international rugby, but it is getting Ireland out of trouble. Even the way they won that game, kick off really well, Ryan Baird puts pressure on, they make a tackle, make another turnover, their defensive breakdown obviously is a real strength, and Johnny Sexton, yet again, at the age of 35, nails his kick to get them out of trouble. It would have been disastrous to even draw that, really, wouldn't it, after leading by 14 points. So they're turning up. Even the way they made Scotland work for the levelling try was impressive and gritty. You think of Will Connors making that excellent tackle again. So there's application there. The players clearly want to play for Andy Farrell, but I agree, I don't think the quality's been there. And having watched that match on Saturday between France and England, there was definite gulf, obviously, in the quality. So I wouldn't be too confident, but I do think Ireland can really refine things and have an extremely specific game plan for this match that probably suits where they have been stronger and do have players with strength. So Conor Murray and Johnny Sexton, if they're going to be kicking, Aki and Henshaw in midfield, being really physical and direct, and probably not worrying as much about trying to get out to the 15s and their shape that Mike Cat's been trying to bet in and hasn't really worked. Just refine it and focus it.
Bernard, just to stick with the plus column for the moment, right? As Murray says, there is a kind of a real sense of collectiveness, I think, camaraderie about this Irish team, and they are base level requirements you would imagine for international sport, not to mind rugby. Iain Henderson mentioned actually earlier in this campaign, he was doing some live stuff and I just happened to be covering it, and he talked about how actually teams don't have that as a kind of a fundamental principle, or it's not kind of an automatic thing. It does need to be worked on. And when you see the way the Irish forwards particularly are handling their opponents at the moment, they were a match for France, I think you could say, and they've probably dominated Wales. You'd expect them to dominate Italy, and they really beat the crap out of Scotland to the extent that we didn't think they could. I thought when we were chatting last week, there are a lot of things that they're doing very well that shouldn't be taken for granted either, is what I'm trying to say. Like the belligerence with which they're attacking the breakdown and disturbing opposition ball, getting after it, the line-out thing that we mentioned, there are some really, really good things, or they're doing things really, really well. It's just that they're not doing enough of them really well, I suppose, at the moment.
Yeah, they are doing those things very well, and we should be grateful they are. And that's probably, in some ways, that could be our downfall, because it means we never really get exposed. Like, so I would say England losing that game to Scotland in the manner they lost at round one, and then obviously the Welsh game, the discipline issues, and okay, we know there was 14 points, but I actually think England now would be better for that, if that makes sense. I think that's forced Eddie to. I know he's gone with the same players as such, but I think they are evolving now. And the problem for Eddie was that the game plan they had in 2020 and most of 2019 was still being effective. Less so, and the games were getting closer, but they were still Grand Slam winners, I think, and won the Autumn Cup. So it's hard to evolve, when you're on top. Whereas my concern is that we haven't reached the point where there's a realization that we have to get better in those other areas. But yet, because we're strong in the fundamentals of work rate, honesty, good set piece, and we kick a lot of contestables, we're never going to get hammered. Or we shouldn't get hammered. You know what I mean? Because we dominate possession, we dominate territory. Teams don't go, bar England last year in Twickenham or where they went, 80 metres. It's unlikely that teams will go 80 metres against you. So we'll always be competitive. I would like to hope, but that doesn't necessarily mean we're going to be winning trophies. And so yeah, I don't think all is bad. But having said that, the areas that we said post World Cup we needed to improve on haven't improved, and we've had a couple of this is our third campaign, so that's the concern. And I think against England, I think the reason that England-France game was such high quality was both teams wanted to play. So Ireland, I agree with Murray, Ireland shouldn't want to play this weekend as much. Hence, England won't have as many opportunities to look good. You know what I mean? So I've been caught lots of times looking at two teams play and going, "Wow, that's standard." They'll eat an opposition who don't look as good. But the reality is, you need two teams who want to play to have a high quality game like that. And I don't see Ireland doing that. But going back to if Conor starts, again, questions massively our understanding of how to use the bench. And I think, if Conor hasn't played for a few weeks, 20 minutes against Scotland when you're 14 points up would have been good for him. If you plan to pick him against England, and surely they know 6 days, with a 6-day turnaround, they have an idea of who they're going to play against England. So that would be a big shock for me if he starts, having not gotten any game time last weekend. And also, if Billy Burns is on the bench, again, his confidence is going to be shot, because we obviously didn't trust him to bring him on against Scotland, even though, Andy said Johnny had cramp with 10 minutes to go. You know what I mean? So that's a worry for me. If Conor starts, I have no issue with Conor starting, because I understand why we would use him. But my issue would be, would not being great to get 20 minutes into him, or 15 minutes or 10 minutes in last weekend, just to get him up to speed.
That's been a persistent issue, hasn't it, Bert? Really, the bench. Yeah. And there doesn't seem to be a clear strategy or a clear response to circumstances in games. But I suppose, Gav, just to go back to, there are loads in the positive ledger as well. Even the fact that they've, I suppose, steadied the ship a little bit. We thought they beat Scotland by 3. I know the circumstances were far from ideal in how they eventually just grabbed it, but they got that bit done. And there were some players playing really, really good rugby, which almost makes it a little bit more frustrating. If you think of Iain Henderson, who's, I can't think of him being this good across the course of his career, really. It's career form. He's been rampant, really. Tadhg Beirne has become a test force, really, a guy who we never quite knew where he was going to fit into the starting team. Now you have to fit him in no matter where it is. Will Connors has been brilliant the last couple of games. Unfortunately, it sounds like he might be injured this weekend. Again, the team's named in a couple of hours after we talk, which would be a blow if that is the case, because he's been excellent. Robbie Henshaw, again, probably in career form. He looks really physically on it, really confident, and a contrast to a lot of the players around him, I would say. Even Gary Ringrose probably in the last couple of games beside him, who's probably had... He's illustrated, I suppose, the attacking problems where decisions haven't gone right, and then it gets in their head a little bit. Obviously, he's gone this game, and he's a blow. He is an excellent player, as is James Ryan, a big blow for this game. But there are some guys there who are playing excellent rugby. Other guys haven't really been in that kind of form, and that's a frustration. It's a little bit like Ireland. There's an inconsistency even in the quality of the individual performances. And that's been the story of them, really. There's not been a consistency across a whole lot of areas of the game. The defence, as Bernard mentions. The one thing has probably been the line-out defence, they've been absolutely lethal. They're 14 steals so far in the championship. Next best is Wales on 7. It's been absolutely ridiculous, really. And England will have spent a lot of time focusing on that, because that's probably the one area they feel Ireland can win the game. I mean, without that line-out defence, it'll be a very different looking championship for Ireland. So that's a massive part of this weekend, but it has been really positive for Ireland.
Yeah, just on that, we've also been highly illegal. And no, like absolutely, you got to push the laws. And I'm not. I think it's brilliant, but I would be shocked if Matt Proudfoot and Eddie Jones haven't highlighted to the referee how we're getting in the air early before the ball's left the hooker's hand, how we're closing the gap, etc. So, like, if the referee referees that strictly, and sometimes you see at the end of the competition you get punished for things you get away with during it. It might be just an area that we don't get as much out of, or maybe gives them penalty opportunities off their own throw. And again, like I'm just looking at some of it and going, well, if you're Matt Proudfoot and you're doing your opposition analysis and you're sending your footage to the referee, you're going to be making them aware of, some not blatant. Yeah, well, it is blatant to a coach. Yeah, so that the referee will need to look at. And again, it might be just fresh in his mind. And he might ignore it, but just to highlight that might not necessarily be an area of strength for us, again, purely because we've had a competitive advantage in that area.
Do you reckon that can work both ways sometimes, Bernard, when coaches do flag certain things about an opposition that it's obvious that they are trying to influence the referee? I mean, it's actually transparent, but that referees might actually not take kindly to that. Like, don't tell me how to do my job, and they might see sort of similar incidents in the game and kind of think, actually, that's not one of those that you were talking about, almost finding a reason to not ping it a little bit.
Yeah, 100%. Particularly, like, I've had experiences where, we've sent stuff in and then the ref tells you, yeah, but you did that against Glasgow or whatever, you know what I mean, as well. So you have to be careful. Look, it's a risk worth taking, and sometimes it works. You often see early in the games, you'll know if he's read the memo and if he agrees with you. And if it does, yeah, great. Like you can win a game on it. You can win a game on it, having highlighted this. The key is not to show 10 different areas of the game they're cheating in. It's literally the one that's most blatant, and hopefully get the referee supervisor on board as well and have that chat in the dressing room. Did you see the clips? Do you agree? Yeah, just reinforcing it again. And yeah, look, it's part of the game before the game.
Just a quick update, Gav, on the referee front, our weekly update. It's Matthew Reynal this week with Alex Ruiz and Gozer as his assistant refs, and Roman Poit is on TMO. So that'll be interesting. I just checked there, we got the standard bollocks Father Ted reply on Twitter. So it feels like a regular occurrence now.
All is well with the world, Murray. Grass is green, sky is blue. That should be interesting, to be fair. It sounds like an entertaining bunch of maverick officials. I've got a question here about Iain Henderson that I want to throw to you, Murray, because as you flagged there, we have some players that are playing unbelievably as individuals. Henderson is one of them, and Tadhg has probably been like the player of the tournament for all teams, I think, as far as I can see. Even though Ireland have had a patchy tournament, he's been absolutely outstanding in every game. Henderson sort of, I think, has been almost as influential, but maybe doesn't get the plaudit so much anymore. And this question is about that, actually, from Paddy O'D. Paddy says, is there an unfair perception that Henderson is inconsistent or hasn't delivered his full potential? Yes, he gets lots of injuries, but nearly every time he plays for Ireland, he's one of our best 5 players. He's rarely the best player, but nearly always in that top tier bracket, which is an amazing level of consistency. I think he may not get the credit he deserves because of his, at times, laid back body language and the fact that he doesn't do as much media as others, etc. Yeah,
I mean, as we say, his form has been brilliant. Unfair, maybe, I don't know. I think the frustration has been, we know he's capable of this. This is his potential now that we're seeing maximised. And I remember talking about this before, about the bit in Sean O'Brien's book where he expressed that frustration, where he felt Henderson wasn't quite fully sure himself of just how good he could be. And now I think we're seeing it in the big test matches. He's been that dominant force. Yeah, some of his work probably goes under the radar and has in the past, and the injuries certainly have held him back a little bit. But now you're seeing the really complete performances, unbelievably aggressive in the tackle. He's making strip tackles. He's winning those jackal turnovers he's always had in the armoury. He's carrying aggressively. He's covering ground really with massive work rate, obviously running a line out efficiently, and it's been at its best when he's been the guy in charge of it. I know James Ryan did a bit of it last year, and they were probably the games where, not just through James Ryan's fault, that things didn't go so well. He's been a steady hand and taken on that responsibility, as well as being obviously an important leader. He got the chance to captain the team for the first time. We spoke about inconsistency. He's one of the guys who's been consistent. As soon as he came off the bench against Wales, he was just destructive, and that's what he's been ever since. And I think he's answered any of those questions that people like Sean O'Brien and some of his other teammates clearly had about him, and felt he could be even more of a force. I mean, Warren Gatland, watching that last weekend, is definitely put him in his squad again. Obviously he toured in 2017, but he's thinking, that's a guy I've got to give serious consideration to absolutely rip into the Springboks. That's how good, honestly, I think he is at his very best. And now he's hit that marker on a consistent basis. He got to just keep pushing it on, because him and Ryan obviously look like a brilliant pairing. He's probably getting more of the wider plaudits, but I think it probably has been fair that people have had reservations about it, and that's not true him playing badly. I think he's been playing, obviously you don't win that many caps by playing badly, but there was always that extra level left in him, and it's really thrilling, I suppose, to see him bringing that out.
That's a great point, Birch, about that extra level. I think it's like he's unlocked an extra tier to his own game, probably since even getting the Ulster captaincy, where there is more responsibility on him. And even when he was given it, he seemed obviously enthused, but a little bit uncomfortable, which is completely understandable, in that it was going to be new for him. He had to consult with Rory Best, and he's done the same with Johnny Sexton when he took the captaincy for Ireland. And it feels as though maybe with that weight of expectation and responsibility, there are no hiding places. You can't have a day off or a weekend off anymore, where you only kind of play 6 out of 10. You need to be one of the guys who's consistently standing up. And in relation to the question about criticism over his consistency, I think he has had periods in his career where he's been inconsistent. It's just that at this present moment, it's not one of them. He's actually consistently brilliant.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that this is one where I would give some credit to Paul O'Connell. I think that Henderson has spent a lot of time with him. I'm sure they're working on the individual parts of his game, and he's always had the ability, but what we're seeing now is week in, week out, and also probably pressure. Pressure from Ryan Baird coming up, who obviously has... See, Henderson's always been quite unique in that he was always probably more athletic than the guys competing with him, whereas probably he's not as athletic as Baird, which is testament to Baird. He's still a very good athlete. So I would say there's, maturity, an injury-free run. I think Paul's definitely helping him and giving him a little bit more, detail around his line-out work, his breakdown work, and pressure from Ryan and Ryan Baird. And altogether, it's been good for us because, we're seeing the best of him.
He's a really interesting kind of character. He's a little bit different to other guys in the squad. If people get a chance, listen to a podcast. It's Niall Annett. He used to play for Ulster and Ireland under-20s over in Worcester Warriors. Actually made his 100th appearance there last weekend. He does a podcast called Wind Your Neck In, and he does an interview with Henderson, who he's mates with. And it's a very revealing interview about Henderson, about his attitude towards rugby at the start, about how guys had to probably light a fire under him, how he maybe had to change his approach to training, and even his attitude towards rugby now, and how it's not the be-all and end-all. It's quite revealing about him, and it's great to have different characters like that in the mix. But he's definitely had to tweak elements of his natural, I suppose, personality and bring that constant aggression as well. So he's done that brilliantly, and I think he's right in the mix for that Lions, even for a possible start.
We do, I suppose, have to talk about some negatives, Bernard, and we've sort of skirted around the attack a little bit. I want to ask you, do you think any differently about it now than you have throughout the competition? Because it's a talking point every week, but it doesn't seem to my eye anyway, and it is an untrained eye, that it is getting any better. I can't see any of the sort of details surrounding the attack improving. Do you see anything that would suggest it's going in the right direction at all at the moment?
No, I don't.
What an answer.
I don't think it's getting better. I wish I could say I thought it was getting better, but I don't. I honestly don't. And even guys like Gary Ringrose, who is top end, have become more conservative. So the whole thing around, the bit of criticism that came from the coaches about the players not implementing the game plan. Either the game plan is to bash it, or the players have become more conservative, and and that's being conservative is what got us where we got to. And even though other parts of our game has improved, I still think unless you have an attack that has a real cutting edge, it's going to be difficult. You're going to have to beat teams with emotion, and you're going to have to win, get last minute penalties and be good at the breakdown and win jackal turnovers, etc., etc. But I think certain teams won't let you be close enough to them do that if you don't improve your attack. So, look, I think when Johnny plays, our attack will always be decent. It will always be better than it is when he doesn't play, because I think he influences others around him, and he pre-calls things and he gets people in position. So you'll have some semblance of shape with him. But I think that's not the future. You know what I mean? You have to have a team. And also, I don't think Joey, this is the interesting one. A lot of people will say, oh, Joey playing 10, he's going to carve it up. Joey's an instinctive player, and we see Finn Russell, the trouble he gets into being instinctive at test level. I actually don't think Joey being 10 will improve our attack on its own. There has to be a collective understanding of what we're trying to do. In actual fact, I think Joey could end up getting in trouble running up blind alleys because there's not enough support around him, because he's naturally quieter than Johnny. Because I think Billy Burns and Ross Byrne have been done a disservice and been harshly criticised for their roles in our attack. Whereas if they had a more, if everybody knew what they were trying to do, I think it'd be a lot easier for them to come in and do it. And the reason Johnny's able to overcome that is because of his experience, of his stature in the team, of his personality. He can make it better than it actually is. If that makes sense. I think that Johnny covers up for cracks in the system.
Christ, how bad is it, Murray, if Johnny is making it look better than it is?
Yeah, like without going too far on this, I think Mike Catt and Andy Farrell have kind of misjudged the way the game is going. Like, look at France. They're unbelievably good off line out, structured attack. I know they've capability of opening up and absolutely making brilliant decisions on the ball. But even within that, even if you think of their first try, there's loads of bits of structure in that. There's a really clear understanding of who's going to hold the short side for the first try. And then really nice square running and fixing defenders, which Ireland haven't done. Basics like that. Ireland's set piece attack has definitely got worse as this championship has gone on. There's no two ways about it. It was really poor again last weekend. Getting run into touch off a scrum, not even making gain line dents on first phase of line out attacks that meander across 3 or 4 phases, and it's unclear what exactly they were trying to do, and certainly not picking out any Scottish weaknesses. And that's been a bit of a theme. And they've talked loads about heads up rugby, and they're generally talking about the phase play and being more creative in phase play. But even like, look at England's attack last weekend, the first half, thrilling attack in the first half. And it's easy to go, they took the shackles off, but they didn't. It was really structured, some of the stuff they did. Think of Henry Slade's kind of break off a lovely little bit of shape in midfield, where they add in another kind of release player at the back, and he draws a defender away. This is in the middle of phase play, but it's highly structured, highly drilled. I'm not saying you take away any semblance of freedom and autonomy. You still have decisions within that, but there has to be a bit more, I think. And it looks like to me Ireland's players don't have that, both in set piece and in phase play attack. There's a real muddiness around it all. And I think, as I say, this game is really refined game plan, but it's vital that they go away over the next few months, Catt and Farrell, and rethink exactly what they're doing. And that when the players come back in, there's a lot more. I mean, clarity is the word we've spoken about. And I'm not saying you prescribe every single thing, but give players a sense of where they're going, what they're doing in each area of the pitch, and where they need to be to support a teammate. Because they're not even producing line breaks now. I mean, you look back at the game last weekend, they were down for 3. Brett Igo did a good little clip of all the line breaks in the game, and 2 of them were catching. Were the box kicks even good, actually? I don't know. They caught the box kicks, they got tackled a couple metres later. And the other one wasn't really a line break either. So they're just not cutting defences apart. And that's an issue, a big one. I know Test rugby is about so much more than just that. You've got to have the set piece, you've got to have the defence, but that is a big one for them to work on.
Birch, this is going to briefly sound like a football podcast question, but looking at England and France playing the way they both played, is it true that we just do not have the players to be able to play that way?
No, completely untrue. Completely untrue. We could definitely play a lot more and better and hurt teams easier. So yeah, I don't agree with that. I look at the counter argument would be, we don't have a Fiku or a Dupont, but I don't think that England's backline individually. Max Malin's an exciting player, and I'm looking forward to seeing him. But I don't think they're far superior than us. The problem for us is our back three players don't get any ball. They don't get any good ball. Let's give him a chance. If you're going to pick James Lowe, get the ball in his hands as much as possible, because he's far more comfortable with the ball than he is without it. Get the ball into Keith Earl's hands. Get Keenan coming in, hard into the line. But like we aren't very good at that. So that's if you're playing between the 15s, you'd want to have Vakatawa can potentially do something in that space, but Robbie and Gary, they're unbelievably good players. They're brilliant players and they run hard, etc. But you're not going to make line breaks in that channel, unless you're someone completely freak athlete. So we don't have those. So, but yeah, we just bash and go direct, and don't give our wings. Just let our wings try and defend and chase kicks.
Do you think the players are hardwired, or maybe?
Sorry, I don't think this is the week. This isn't the week to do it. This isn't the week to do it without having practice. And that's what happened to us in Twickenham last year. We thought we could get round them, so we were overly optimistic about our attacking shape, and we got caught behind the gain line, and it was a disaster. So I certainly wouldn't be advocating it this week.
I want to be careful.
I think they need to have a good look at the trend of the game and everything. I go back to France. Definitely some great players. Their line-out attack has been absolutely essential in this championship. Their kicking game is the major improvement since Galtier took over. Bernard knows Loxillier as well, and he's had a huge impact. And interestingly enough, last weekend against England, their kicking game wasn't good, and that was one of the major differences between the team. They've improved by nailing that kicking game, by being unbelievably good off line-out and set-piece attack. And then when you get your opportunities, yes, their players have good decision-making skills. But for me, France have nailed the right things, and Ireland have focused on things that have made no impact.
I want to be careful how I word this, because it might sound ungrateful or something off the bat. But is there a chance that there is a bit of a hangover still from the Schmidt era? When you talk about autonomy, Murray, that maybe the likes of Robbie Henshaw, Gary Ringrose, and some of the guys in Ireland's backline were hardwired to play in a system, and that sense of instinct or maybe intuition has been kind of removed from their game just through osmosis and through a period of time. I'll throw it to yourself, Bert. You put your hand up there, sorry.
Yeah, I think this is... I'd love Murray's opinion on this, but I think there's so much focus on the softer side, the softer skills, and I absolutely they're important, and your environment and togetherness and feeling of teammanship are really important. But if you listen to a lot of the stuff that Andy speaks about, it's all the softer stuff. Like it's, in Paris last year, the reason we lost was we didn't believe at half time. There was a thing last week around the lads are too quiet and we need to develop better leaders, etc. Self-belief, we need to develop self-belief. This is a team who, in a previous regime were amongst the best in the world for a period of time, who for their provinces win and fancy themselves to beat anybody. Munster will believe they can beat Toulouse, in the next stage of the quarterfinal. Leinster will believe they can win the competition. Ulster aren't a million miles away. Connacht, would go into every game confident. So, you're not dealing. It's not like picking the Italians and trying to say, we got to build up their confidence, because I can understand why that's on the floor. So, realistically, the players will get confidence from seeing a game plan evolve, seeing areas of the game evolve, like our line of defence has, like our scrum has got better, like our breakdowns got better. But unfortunately, you need more than just three areas of the game. You know what I mean? We need to add on another piece. And I don't think our players lack leadership. I don't think our players lack the skill set to to play a more rounded game. But unfortunately, that seems to be, talking about character after beating Italy, like, you don't need to show character to beat Italy. Now, unfortunately, like, it's not the part of the game that's more important that week. You need to show a lot of character to beat England, France, sure, but like, it shouldn't have been about the character. It should have been about, because we'd only lost 2 games. It wasn't like we were on our knees, and there was reasons why we lost 2 games. So, I think there has to be a focus now on the rugby side of it. Because they've done a good job of getting the team enjoying camp and all that stuff. That was important, but that can't last for 4 years of just talking around character and how honest we are. We need to put a plan in place.
That's why it was good this week to hear Johnny Sexton say, even if we beat England, it doesn't. He didn't say it exactly. It doesn't gloss over. It's not a good championship. They obviously want to be competing, and I think he's been more honest and upfront about it, I think, in the last couple of weeks in particular, probably in contrast to some of the other stuff they talked about. And that's important. But it's important that other guys around Johnny Sexton also grab that and take it on, and don't settle into an acceptance of this, because Ireland now, since 2018, have been this team, up and down, middle of the road, clear weaknesses and deficiencies and inconsistent. And that shouldn't be acceptable to a high-performing environment like that. That is built and set up, as we've discussed in previous episodes, to be one of the top 3 teams in the world on a consistent basis, to get to semi-finals in World Cups, to win 6 Nations titles. So yeah, it's good to hear Johnny Sexton laying that kind of marker down. Obviously, if they're beating them this weekend, unbelievable fill-up and boost for the entire group, and leaves them in a nice place to build. But regardless of the result, there's lots of work to do based across the course of this whole championship.
So you both think an element of conservatism is required to have any chance of beating England. Murray, I'll stick with yourself. But how do you make the distinction then between, say, how you want Ireland to play this weekend and how they have played against England in the past that hasn't worked? You said earlier, like, there's an element of maybe insanity about doing a certain thing, but what are the distinctions between the type of game plan you want to see this weekend and what you've seen in the past against England?
Probably what we've said before, I think we said this before the last game, is a better variety in their kicking game. Obviously, they've kicked heavily and a lot of kicks each time they've played England, but very often without putting pressures on England. And you think about the last day, obviously the chip was a great example late on in the game. I'm not saying chip it every single time, but why shouldn't that be part of your strategy even a little bit earlier in the game? You saw France do it actually early on against the English. It was really interesting to try and take away a little bit of that line speed to pose questions. I think it's important, definitely from the 2 halfbacks, that they're not just throwing a box kick at England every time, that there's a little bit of thinking through it, that they've maybe played a phase and then they kick for a cross kick when a wing is exposed. And then you would hope that the midfield or even Hugo Keenan and the wingers can contribute to it as well. That for me is key. It's just a little bit more variety to it, and certainly a greater level of conviction in how they're going about it. You'd hope that the plan has picked out a few little weaknesses in that regard, a few players that they can put under pressure, someone like Maylands who hasn't been in that test arena for too long, and then defend, as Bernard said, that's half the game as well. They've got to defend really accurately, really aggressively. They've got to have their own backfield nailed down. You think of Johnny May scoring off a cross kick last time out. You think of him scoring from his own 22 rather, when Ireland's defence just fell apart. It was too easy a try, albeit an incredible solo effort. So they've got to absolutely nail those things. There's been inconsistency on that side of it as well. And I think when you marry those bits together with hopefully a good functioning set piece, you've got the makings of really being in a battle and within a couple of minutes of winning. So I think it will be a narrow one in my eyes, because it's not going to be that open game that England probably would excel in.
Yeah, that's an interesting point, because looking at the way England played, and you touched upon it yourself earlier, Bernard, like the way Ireland are defending, if England were to be allowed to play as expansively and as fluidly as they did against even Wales, going back as far as that defeat for them, they could rip us apart. And I just wonder, in terms of the accuracy of our defending, as Murray puts it, it seems like shape-wise, I don't know, to my, again, untrained eye, at times it seems okay, but it just seems like lapses in concentration, like individual errors more so that are being punished than anything structural. But then maybe those errors are being caused by a problem with structure. I'd love to get your thoughts on it.
Yeah, it's a mix, really. I mean, the James Lowe missed tackle for the last Scottish try. That's a missed tackle. That's an individual error. We were numbered up there, but there has been structural issues as well that I think we've been letting slide. There's been no sign of it being improved, and even against Scott, I know it sounds like a broken record, but like Ty Byrne was on the edge of our defence, or Ty Furlong was on the edge of our defence, and kick chase, and he got skinned, and you know that happened against Italy a couple of times, and you know we only can see the one try, but like England will see, England and Eddie Jones will see those opportunities to pick off our front row players if they're on the edge. There's probably a lack of real belief in terms of our wingers or our last defenders at back in terms of getting those reads right. They have made a lot of ground from kicking in the backfield and finding grass in the past. We think Hugo Keenan, is a lot better at anticipating that and covering the ground. So maybe that's an area that's not going to be as exposed. But yeah, look, I think I fear for our D. Like you saw how soft we were defensively. I mean, Robbie Henshaw puts in a great hit on Van der Merwe off a scrum, but like they were 25 yards over the gain line, and it's poor play by the winger. You know what I mean? He shouldn't be getting put in a touch there, and then they're on the front foot. So there's lots of little areas that I think England will spot. Now, having said that, I think there'll be loads of emotion because it's England. There'll be loads of emotion because it's CJ's last game, and that can maybe paper over some of the cracks that are there structurally, and we get away with it this week. But again, from a defensive point of view and an attack point of view, you just want to see similar things happening regularly, and that's where you get better. And at the moment, I couldn't be really confident that our defence would, particularly the way England want to play now. I mean, against Wales, they played some of their best attacking rugby, and against France, they played some really good attacking rugby. And again, you would say they're not going to come to Ireland and fear being shut down with massive aggressive line speed on the outside. So you'd be surprised if they didn't try and go wide early and often and put us under the pump there.
That frightens me, Murray, because even going back to the most recent game between the two countries, it felt almost like a training ground exercise for England. Like they played a lot of that game almost in their own 22 or in their own territory. It felt like they were trying to work on specific things, probably mainly kicking, and we've seen that a little bit in the past. In recent times, to me, it's felt like England have been playing almost 60 or 70% against Ireland. They haven't had to move up through the gears at all to beat Ireland. And it seems now as though they are moving through the gears a little bit, particularly against France and Wales, as Bernard says. So are we kind of, I don't know, you reckon it might be a narrow kind of a game or a narrow margin between them, but are we being maybe even a bit ambitious in thinking as much?
Yeah, potentially. Think back to last day, and the line-out was a shit show, wasn't it? I mean, it wasn't on the scale of Scotland last weekend, but it was really damaging, and for me, the most important factor in the match, and contributed towards England getting those two quick-fire scores. A couple of line-out errors, bit of indiscipline. They go into the corner, they win penalty advantage, crossfield kick, Johnny May, unbelievable player, leaps and scores, and then obviously a ridiculous try for him to score, but also to concede from a line-out error in the England 22. And they got that lead, and from there they just said, you can have the ball. We know your attack is not going to break us down. We're going to enjoy this. And that made perfect tactical sense. Now, the circumstances of the game, say if Ireland get a good start, may dictate that that's not a good strategy for them. But even the nature of that game will certainly give them a lot of belief in the same way that Ireland had belief against Scotland last weekend. Even when they went level, I would imagine the Irish players would say, like, this is Scotland. We've beaten them 9 out of 10, last 10 times. We're going to win this game. England come to Dublin expecting a victory, expecting to smother any Irish attack. And so, yeah, that's why it's key for those bits. Like the line out has improved. That's a positive from the last time. Again, they'll have learned not to try and play into the face of that. When you have poor ball, slow ball, you're behind the gain line, don't force it into wide channels because you've talked about playing heads up rugby and being a more ambitious attack in phase play. Don't fall into that trap. And get your discipline nailed on as well, because England are a good enough team to take advantage of any slips in those essential areas. So, yeah, Ireland have to be close to their absolute peak here to make it a contest. I am, I suppose, heartened from Ireland's point of view by the improvement in the line out. And their discipline was good the last day, although a little bit inconsistent again under Andy Farrell. And I just think emotionally it's a big occasion. We spoke about CJ Stander. There'll be that motivation. There's going out on a high. You're at home in Dublin, trying to save a bit of pride. I don't think it'll be enough for Ireland to win, but I think they will make a bit of a battle of it.
It's funny, Bernard, like it does feel like a bit of a regression to be talking about requiring an emotional type of performance, the thing that we were probably trying to move away from a little bit during the latter years of the Schmidt era, which was like to back ourselves to be good enough, and we wouldn't need to summon this kind of Celtic belligerence on a given Sunday to beat one of these teams. That's where we're back to now, I think it seems.
Yeah, I think that's where we're back to this week. And there's a lot to be said for it. You can win a match with that, but I think when the coaches do the review of the Six Nations, even if we get a win this weekend, I still think that they won't be really sure what's nailed on that they can start to add another layer to. I think it's just been too, it's come in fits and starts. There's been no consistency, and I would say, defensively, not close to the ruck, we're fine. But I think on the outside channels, we're definitely not anywhere near where we need to be. And attack-wise, yeah, we have to work pretty hard for our scores. And even the Robbie Henshaw first try, it's pretty fortuitous. We had him, we had opportunities in there 22, and we weren't able to really pull a trigger and convert them easily. We needed a bit of a break.
I think I said this before the France match. Is it a good thing? And this may sound silly, but if Ireland get a bit of a hammering here, lose heavily, maybe that's a good thing. Before the France game, I kind of felt that way, that nothing's going to change if they lose by 2 points here. They felt in the France game, we got close to France. I don't think any three of us, and most honest Ireland fans, felt they were close. They got a lucky bounce for the try. And France missed chances. We don't need to go over it again, but maybe if they lose heavily to England, it gives them a fresh eye and go, where are we going? What's the point here? We're clearly not going to win a Six Nations playing like this. We're clearly not focusing on the World Cup because we're doing everything for the now rather than 2 years' time. I don't think people are asking us about a 4-year cycle every week in the members WhatsApp group. I don't think there is a 4-year cycle plan here, to be honest. They've just tried to react to the now. And if you get hammered by England at home, well, there's a moment where you go, this has to change. They can kind of meander on and it'll be okay for another couple of years. But if okay is good enough, then that's disappointing.
It'd make you puke though, wouldn't it? To get a battering at home against England, it'd feel like 2003 or something. I'm not. Stop. I know what you're saying about the greater good, but can we not do that in a different game, maybe?
Yeah. Maybe Fiji can hammer us this summer.
I'd like to hope that because all our senior players, bar CJ, will be there next year, that they will, now that all that stuff's done, they will have a real kind of forensic look at what we're doing. I'd be shocked if the likes of Peter and Johnny and even Henderson, etc., don't expect more. And I was surprised that there was talk about we're second this week. I mean, we're only second because France and Scotland haven't played. You know what I mean? So there's just little things that have been said which worry me in terms of what our expectation is. I actually think we should be contending. We should be contending for this competition. Not saying we should win it every year, but there's definitely enough talent, and we shouldn't just be. And obviously we haven't beaten Wales, but and Wales over the last 10 years have been incredibly successful. But realistically, we should minimum be able to beat the teams that we play against in a Pro 14, because we invest far more than they do into rugby in this country. So that's the minimum, and then you got to be stretching towards France and England and Wales, because collectively they're in a shot this week. But beating Scotland and Italy every year, it shouldn't be enough, really. Shouldn't be enough. So I think I think it will happen. I think maybe the players, because their contracts were up, were focused on getting that sorted out. But I'll be shocked if we went into next year's Six Nations, because they're also as well. If you pick the same team all the time, you have less risk of the result going away from you. There's lots of studies done on cohesiveness in sport. So because we've stuck with pretty much the tried and tested bar, one or two additions, they know each other very well. There's that trust there, etc. So that's going to make you more competitive anyway. You know what I mean? But it's not going to make you better. It's not going to win you trophies necessarily, because you have to keep finding better talent, etc. But we're missing out on that, I suppose, period where you needed to bet in. And if you look at, in fairness to Pivac, I know he had a shock in 2020 and he's had a lot of luck, but potentially now he's found a couple of players that will be a part of the World Cup and could make Wales better next year in the Six Nations. Rhys Zammit, Callum Sheedy maybe will come in and take over from Bigger, over the next period. He's not there yet, but he's closer to being there than he was, a year ago. Whereas realistically for us, are we sure Gibson Park is going to be ahead of Murray next year? I don't know. I'd be doubtful. Are we sure Hugo's going to be 10 or 12, 15? Yeah, probably. But is James Lowe head of Stockdale? Don't think so. Is Herring as good as Keller? I don't think we've done a huge amount to develop new players either.
What about the Welsh then, Birch? Before I get your predictions for Ireland-England, which I fear now at this point, can Wales win a Grand Slam this weekend? It feels as though probably the first game, maybe in rugby union history, where France are going in fearing the bounce of the ball.
Look, Wales can. I mean, Wales have got momentum now. They've got their actually attack is probably better than it was maybe under Warren. They've got a good balance to their play. They've got lots of confidence. They've got some top end players. I mean, like Faletau, Tipperick are incredible. George North's back playing well. They've got guys who are still in top form. So I think they could go. You'd have to fancy France, but if Wales were to pull off a win, it wouldn't really surprise me. I mean, they're not a million miles away from England and France when they're on form. The problem for them in 2020 was, there's lots of stuff happening in the background of Welsh rugby. Pivac was trying to evolve the game, and it just took a while. But now, with a bit of luck, they've got confidence and momentum, and they've also, I think, improved their defence and attack.
Murray, who do you fancy in that one?
Allez les Bleus. I think France are to put themselves in a good position for that Scotland game week after. We get a bonus weekend of Six Nations, so I think they'll be definitely in the hunt that weekend.
And tell me your thoughts about Ireland-England finally. Give us a margin, I suppose, because I sense you're leaning towards England.
England by 5, I think. I do think Ireland will, as I said, make a battle of it, but I just cannot see England not winning this given the momentum they carry forward. The guys like Itoje, Farrell, who've had some tricky games to start the championship, but were just immense last weekend. So, yeah, I think England to win.
Birch?
Yeah, England 25, Ireland 18.
Well, lads, I wish I could say it's been a pleasure.
Give us one of your predictions before the last weekend.
I think England by 12. I was going to just bullshit and say Ireland by a couple just to make people feel happy, but it makes me sound like a clown every time I do it, so I'm just not going to. I think England by a couple of scores, but Ireland will be competitive and the world will continue to turn. We'll still be having this same conversation this time next year, and I don't look forward to it, frankly. But it has been a joy today. Thank you, gents. Thanks a million, Birch.
Nice, guys.
Thank you, Mert.
Cheers, guys.
And thanks to everybody at home as well, all of the 42 members especially, for supporting our independent sports journalism and for sending questions. Sorry I didn't get to more of them from the WhatsApp group, but you know where we are. We'll get you eventually, no doubt about it. Murray, you will be back, I think, this weekend with a members pod, if I'm not mistaken. Spot on. He's nodding to me here.
We're on after the match, myself and Gary, and then on Monday back with Owen as well to dig into it. So yeah, looking forward to it.
Class, and we'll be back then for non-members in this regular slot next Thursday. So until then, have a great weekend, mind yourselves, take it easy.